Hello, I'm Cameron Peterson. I work at the Rourke Art Gallery Museum, and I also am an independent artist in Fargo.
Hi, I'm Jay Hopkins. I am an art instructor over at Northern State University and a new hiree here at the Dakota Prairie Museum. Hi everyone, welcome to the All Dakota High School Art Judging Workshop. Today Cameron and I will be speaking about each team as a group. Our next group of students is from Aberdeen Christian High School. The first piece we have is a painting. I really enjoy the scene that was set up in this particular painting. It tells a nice little story. You can tell that you're understanding some color mixing quality as well as the value of color shifting in some of the areas of the gown. There's some areas that get a little flat because you push the color a little too dark. Just those key little observations that would help improve that would be what I would say in some of that area. And again, one key way of being able to do that is, since you understand some of this color mixing quality, incorporate those complementary colors in with your greens and your blues, just to push and pull the atmosphere overall.
And this reminds me, I like the simplicity of the conversation, kind of like folk art, where you're telling a story and using the very basic elements to tell the story. And I think you did a good job of displaying that story. Just a little bit of color changes and hues, and looking a little bit more on perspective, how this would be more vibrant in the foreground and that would be a little bit more dull in the background, but yet this would be a little bit more vibrant and duller as you go up.
Right. The next is a graphite drawing named Hamster. I really enjoy the process that was developed in this drawing and those little tiny details when you get up in close and you see those little freckles and that sparkle in her eyes.
Yeah. And just contrast, like I really like this, and you understand blending. I kind of get the feeling that you're using the same lead for your blending. I think it would help if you like experimented with an HB or softer leads versus harder leads, because it looks like you have the understanding of blending down. You need a different instrument to blend it with, or maybe even try it in charcoal. That might be fun for you, because it looks like you enjoy the blending. Curious about why it's called Hamster, but not asking questions.
I thought it was a cute title, nickname. Here's the Untitled Flower and Skull painting. A common storytelling or stage setting to a lot of, I immediately thought of Georgia O'Keeffe with the skull and the flower aspect. However, you can tell that your subject matters were probably images in your mind versus actual observation. So if you're going to do that, really push that element to more of a stylized or surrealist quality within your actual painting. And again, playing around with atmospheric perspective between the foreground and the background. Instead of using one single color, it has a tendency to appear more flat and almost stencil-like. So like I said, if that's what you're achieving, then push it further to that quality. Or if you're going to go more realism, really focus on those observations.
Yeah, I agree. I find someone that's in the balance between illustration and using value shifts. And so pick one or the other and kind of tip the balance one way or another. I see a very good start for a storytelling, and yeah, more of a illustrated atmosphere. It looks like you like to use hard lines, so either kind of use hard lines all the time and get rid of the shading, or go to the value way. I see someone that's very in the middle of both processes.
Right. And the last piece is a fiber batik, celestial strings. Conceptually, design-wise, with positive and negative space, I really enjoy these pieces. I would like to inquire if you've worked with shifting the color of threads, or even your final display being on another element of fabric, or exploring color within your background with the fabric itself would make this a more powerful representation. However, nice use of line.
Yeah. The craftsmanship is great in it. I really like how tight you got your fabric on these boards. Like Jay was saying, I could see like maybe this one and this one on a different background to help make this one jump out more, or have this all on like a fabric background just to reinforce the fabric. But it looks like you have a very good start on what you're trying to do, and it looks really nice. Keep up the craftsmanship. Yes. Keep up the clean lines.
So this is Holgate Middle School. The first one is a pastel colored pencil. Very nice beginning of an illustrator at its best. Nice control of putting down your colors so that it's clear. The one thing I would suggest, again, when it comes to illustration, line is your key tool beyond just color. So variation of fat versus lean lines, maybe even where those details could use some cross hatching.
Yeah, there's I really like this piece, but I agree with Jay that a little bit of a line, like see, this line could be more like a deeper swoop, just to help you move through the piece. And a little bit more of a color variation between colors would help a little bit too. But I think you portrayed how you wanted to portray it. I think even a little bit in the background might help, a little bit of atmosphere, even if it's as simple as just a line, to help pull the figure even more forward.
Right, but for an illustrator way, design concept between your subject matter and your framing, I find that is really nice. This oval shape connecting with those eyeballs.
Yeah.
I found that very eye-catching.
This piece, and this artist is a very brave artist, doing white on white, basically, is what I call it. Very subtle. I think your title is very accurate, elegant, because it does look elegant. It looks very particular and very elegant, very smooth, very not overstated, but stated enough. I like the fact that it's more of a bas relief, or just a shallow relief. I'm pretty sure needle punching.
Right.
And I just think it's very brave to do it that way. And then there isn't much I would change about this piece. Just maybe a little bit more character development or figure development.
Right. But again, this is a great example of understanding the power of line. Even when you come to using dots to create your line, the control of what lines need to be punched forward versus which lines are more subtle, less dot pattern. Very nice control of rendering there. Cloud Jumper. I immediately was attracted by the title and the composition of this piece. Love the title. Ultimately, the color is very attractive too, with the blending and color composition itself between the cloud and the sky. It's just really nicely rendered. What distracts me is some of these white lines around the cloud. If you're going to use that, really make it confidently. Make that line become bold and on purpose in the sense of connecting between the stars and the whale itself. And I think get a little too stylized with the rendering of the clouds in some areas. These variations of line shifting is nice, but even punching that dark purple even more in the background to the foreground to really create depth would be a nice subtle transition there. But again, yeah, love the title.
And this, your sense of composition works really well too, because the clouds bring you in, and then the porpoise or whale?
I called it a whale.
A whale brings it back out again, so your eye is constantly moving, and then the abstract space kind of brings you in, and then the whale kind of pulls you back out into outer space or the sky. So that's a really good judgment call on where the placement of the clouds and the whale are.
This particular graphic design digital imagery is titled Venus Means Beauty. Again, a nice title for your composition itself. I really enjoy this digital approach of the two figures. The one thing that I found distracting is the background of this one. The subtlety of this one I find is really nice, and I want to see that with this one as well, so that the figure comes forward instead of that background competing with it. Maybe even this, like the softest color in the background, having one solid background would create a harmonious unity between these two figures as well. Love the way you captured both figures with those subtle colors, and again, that use of line, nice control of it.
Yes, I agree too. Like, this portrait is a lot stronger than this one, but this one appears stronger because the busyness is actually taken away from it, and so it's just like boom. But this one, actually, there's a lot more rendering, and it looks, I mean, it's a great piece. And like I said, or like Jay said, is just the distraction of the background. Like, if the background was a little bit more duller, like this one, this figure would snap out and be almost twice as powerful as that figure.
Right.
But very good use of line, very sensitive use of line, and very nice use of gradation in the skin. Like this face is just rendered beautifully from an illustration point.
Yeah.
Very good.
Beautiful work.
I find this piece completely energetic and moving. I just love the fact that you can walk around it and see different angles of, it's called Twisted Wave, but just the fact that it kind of stands on its own, even if it didn't have color on it, it would be just as powerful and moving the way that you actually made the shapes, because the way you made the shapes and kind of twisted it makes a person want to walk around it constantly. Like it can't, like the person can't actually see the whole thing at once. I don't mind the color that much, except for the blending of it. It could be smoother. It could be not as rough. It's a little bit of a distraction, but I don't mind the color on it at all. But yeah, I'm just enthralled at the shape and the movement, and taking such a bold action to make something so abstract that you you might not necessarily have a definition for. It was just something you made, and you were strictly just working with a form, and it just with a lot of energy, and you can see the energy in the way that it's shaped.
I would agree with Cameron on that. I find that the abstract and organic quality of the overall shape is intriguing. I'm distracted by the color. If it was all one single color, it would be just as successful. If you're going to incorporate a rainbow bleed of color, really allow those colors to blend in that transition between one element of color to the next.
Like, you did a pretty good job with the black to the purple, but then when you go from the purple to the blue, it gets a little bit jarring and distracting. But the shape is excellent.
Yes.
Great shape.
And the way that the shadows cast, obviously that's a strong pursuit to a three-dimensional object, that the shadows have to be just as interesting as the subject itself, or at least in my eyes. When I look at a sculptural piece, the way the lighting casts those shadows also serve just as much power.
Power as, yep.
Yep. Very nicely done.
Things that I enjoy about this piece is actually the simplicity of it. You're blocking areas off and you're not defining them very well. It actually reminds me of simple storytelling like folk artists do, where they just generally want to get the point out to a person, and they're not making a fancy statement about it. And it really reminds me of folk art, and the fact that you have the symbolism, because folk art, a lot of it deals with symbolism, and you have to know the symbolism to kind of decode the piece that you're looking at. And so you have the sunrise, but then you have this farm, and you have the house, and you're telling a story of a farmyard story. Things that I would like to see more of is, if you're blocking colors like that, make them kind of solid and a little bit of a different hue if they're changing directions in a house. A little bit more contrast, or a little bit more darker lines to emphasize your symbols.
Right. I would agree with Cameron on that level. Also playing with scale to, emphasizing those key elements to your storytelling. If the tree is going to be at the same level as the windmill and the house, if they're all going to be at the same scale as like a miniature setting, then punch it up a little bit, even just by making the lines of the outer edge of the lines more bold, but nice rendering for a storytelling.
Hello, and now we're going through the Aberdeen Central High School group, and we'll start off with Deep Thoughts. This actually led to a lot of conversation between Jay and I. We think the forms are great for what you're portraying there, but we think just a little bit more subtlety, like you call it deep thoughts, and the deep thoughts don't actually have to be screaming into your face, because like a deep thought is more internal than external.
Right. And if you find that the words are just as important, maybe incorporate that into your title as like a build-up or of a story behind the title, and not necessarily that text being incorporated onto your subject matter.
Or just changing the hue of it so it's like just a little bit off-white, so then the people don't really notice it unless they're paying attention to it, and then all of a sudden they're just like, oh, there's words there.
Right, where they have to actually get up and more intimate to read those deep thoughts. The next one is the world. when it comes to rendering of the land, you can see there's a lot of nice exploration of color mixing and transition to your lights and dark values to improve this, along with even the water, playing around with shifting your pigment to a more translucent, like a watercolor, and building up to some of those opaque layers, as well as color mixing, being involved to control spatial depth, being involved with this concept.
Yeah. One thing we did kind of like is you just didn't leave it as a round sphere like we saw that you could have, and you actually tried to build up the typography of the globe, and we really kind of like that three-dimensional aspect of it.
Right. Right. This particular painting is very eye-catching with its color palette. However, the foreground and the background, again, have a tendency to have a fighting competition with each other, in which the background has so much detail and color that it's competing with the figure, perhaps incorporating those complementary color blending between the foreground and the figure to have a more complementary overall surface quality. Maybe even pushing more of like the purples and blues into the skin tone more, so that your figure comes forward from that space.
And I kind of agree too, because like you have so much activity out here that really draws you in, and then this kind of only almost becomes like a just a silent space that's not speaking very well. And so like if there's either some agitation in here that made it a little bit more exciting, or a dulling down of the background a little bit, and I can see that you started to do that, but it might need even more of a push to push your figure forward, because it's kind of all melting together where you lose.
But then there's those nice subtleties of observation, like the glossiness of her lip gloss. I almost want to see more of those types of observation pushed in the figure itself and really own that figure. With this particular photograph, Cameron and I were both talking, very interesting conceptually. You know, these objects not really linking together with them, but yet the color combination, that subtlety is really nice. The high contrast of the glare on the bottles, I find a little bit too distracting. And then I start focusing in on that more so than this simplified orange, white, black color palette.
Yeah, and like I like the cleanness and the detail that you've got into everything, and I think that's why the reflection is distracting to me, is because I can't see the detail of what's inside the jar. And there might be a point where you added some light because you thought this was disappearing, but I would just say tone down the reflection just a little bit, and I think you have a very great. I mean, this is a good piece too because of the details that you've actually picked up, very high quality. Just the reflection is a little distracting. Maybe tone it down or reflect it a different way.
Yeah, like a blue filter to it to make that color harmony.
Yeah.
This is an incredible detailed drawing. It shows the painstaking observation of the artist's eye with the tiny little pointillism details to create those pores and shine of the skin is really nicely rendered. I don't really have a lot of things to say that could improve on this piece because it's just well done.
And I agree too. For a portrait, this is very well done. The layering of the color pencil and pastel is just amazing. It's very high quality drawing, and I was just blown away with it. I mean, it says something when you don't really like the subject matter, but you can't turn away from it because it's such a beautiful piece that you made. I'm blown away by this piece.
Good job. Here's another piece that shows those detailed observation of the artist's eye with those little subtle changes of color values within using paper. I really enjoy this piece.
I do too, and the painstaking of tearing these different colors all apart and then rearranging them to make sense in a collage mosaic type fashion is great. The only thing I could think of is a little bit of definition in this front shoulder, but all in all, this is a very good example of collage and even mosaic. It's almost kind of two
Right.
in one. So
Yeah. This next group that we're going to be speaking of is from Roncalli High School. The first piece is a painting. I really enjoy your control of your blue-green color wash and the galaxy, that speckling effect here. However, the planets get a little lost in this scene. Really nice rendering of these Zentangles, but maybe even incorporating more of what's happening in this background into some of these planets and beefing up those planets so that they are coming out at you.
yeah, and I agree. I really like the atmospheric perspective that you have on the back. You can really sense the space that's going on, that it is space in the background. With the planets, yeah, a little bit more opaqueness, so they stick out, and maybe a little bit more variance. So like some planets are a little bit further back and some planets are a little bit further close. But,
Right. Maybe not necessarily crutching on just white as your source of developing those planets.
A very good piece. This piece I really like. It has a nice flow to it, and the biggest strength in this piece is actually your line quality of how it flows with the different shapes, and how you've changed your line quality makes it really interesting. The only thing that I looked at is your watercolors became a little flat. So like a highlight in the actual watercolor might help you out.
Right. Maybe just playing around with the control of, that translucency to building up areas where there's going to be shadows, or maybe even incorporating that complementary color mix for those shadows and keeping it subtle on that way to create a little bit more space to the piece, but compositionally very soft and intriguing.
Yeah.
This pointillism piece is very nicely done. Pointillism is not an easy task. It's very time consuming. A lot of observation being involved. The atmospheric perspective of the sky becomes more of a wash, and stepping away from that pointillism process to it, maybe incorporating some of that pointillism in with your background, and the subtleties that you use in this atmospheric perspective could be incorporated in your technique of pointillism with the building, so that you're pushing and pulling the details of that building, what's important to be pushing forward in the foreground, and what's not as important to push some of the space of the building.
Yeah, I agree with that. This is very painstaking, and I can see that it took you a long time. But with Jay, I agree that there's no value changes really. It's all kind of on one plane, so you can't tell if this part of the building's going back or forward. And then also with the sky is how you changed it so much. And in my mind, I wouldn't change the sky. I would actually just add to it like little pointillism airwaves just to kind of connect the background with the foreground.
Right, which is done very nicely right in this corner spot of the paved sidewalk. All right, this is a mixed media. I'm assuming some mainly watercolor with pen and ink. I really find the illustration of this very nicely rendered. There's a little conflicting of the spatial issue and where your light source is at, especially with the tail of the fish. Being a higher chroma to it pushes it forward instead of being back into space. So just having that control of color like you have right in here, creating that spatial depth with the subject matter itself.
Yeah, I agree a lot that the intensity of this should be more like the intensity of this under chin, but the way you've drawn it and your illustration aspects of the actual fish are very good. And I like how you use splats and kind of a water spraying in your background to help blend the background into the fish, and you kind of feel like you're on the lake and the moisture's in the air. So
right, but you can definitely tell you have the capability of color control just on how you rendered the difference between this high vibrant fish to the darkness of the water. Nicely done.
on this piece I really liked, again, the abstract versus organic, but that's kind of how I do my own work too. But I do like the overlap of the sunflower. So you're either trying to make it pop out or sink into that square. Right now you have it kind of sinking into the square, where like if you wanted it to pop out beyond the square, you need to make this really opaque. And then one thing I do find missing is like the brown part in the middle of a sunflower seed. That wouldn't just be that dull brown. It would be several different colors, and then maybe even a little reflection of your petals. But I do like the actual overall design of where you started. So.
Right. This is a great example of really having a little bit more fun with your color itself instead of keeping it flat. Maybe incorporating those color complementaries to yellow, having purples, and even like your gray line around the edges to define each petal. Taking in that initial observation with color mixing would make it feel more realistic and coming forward from that space. But design-wise, I find that composition really nicely rendered.
Yes.
This is a piece that Cameron and I had a lot of conversation about as well. There's such a nice control of some of that watercolor rendering, allowing the watercolor to just be the media that it is. There's a couple areas that get really flat from this vibrant movement in the foreground, just creating a more direct horizon line between the sky and the ocean itself would create a little bit more transition to the depth that you're trying to create. And also maybe even shifting away from using the blacks and incorporating more of blues and purples for those shadows for color harmony.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I love your use of watercolor in here, and you're really experimenting, and you are understanding it. Like kind of Jay said, is something to pull this horizon line just a little bit more clear, or maybe make it more dark with the greens up here, but also kind of add with this nice orangish tan, like a little bit of purple might help the sky contrast and give it more motion or more action to it.
Some moodiness to it. Yeah.
Yep.
Very nice.